Jax's revenge domain. I stood there watching Stephanie Parker walk through my equipment yard like she owned the place, her designer heels clicking on concrete that still had my boot prints from this morning's safety inspection. 32 years old with an MBA fresh off the press, while I'd spent 30 years building this operation from nothing. Hell, she'd been here exactly 5 days and was already rearranging my life. My name's Jeffrey Coleman, though everybody calls me Tank. Been Tank since boot camp at Parris Island back in '88. 54 years old now, spent 6 years in the Marines learning how to fix things that shouldn't break and break things that needed fixing. After my discharge, I landed at Apex Heavy Industries when Ronald Stevens was still getting his hands dirty alongside the rest of us. We had 12 employees back then and dreams bigger than our checking account. That Tuesday morning started like every other day for the past 3 decades. I was in the yard at 6 a.m. checking overnight maintenance reports, making sure our caterpillars and excavators were ready for the crews heading out to job sites across Texas. The smell of diesel fuel and hydraulic fluid, the rumble of engines warming up, the familiar weight of my hard hat. This place felt more like home than my empty house since Linda and I signed the divorce papers 3 years back. The thing about military training is it teaches you to pay attention to details that most people miss. Like how Stephanie's entourage of suits moved through the yard avoiding eye contact with the actual workers. Or how her assistant kept checking his phone instead of watching where he stepped around million-dollar machinery. These weren't people who understood construction equipment. They understood spreadsheets. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Jeffrey," Stephanie announced to the assembled supervisors and foremen, gesturing toward me like I was an old piece of equipment they were about to auction off. "He'll be transitioning into our new strategic consulting role while I handle operational leadership moving forward." Strategic consulting, that's corporate talk for we're putting you out to pasture but don't want the union breathing down our necks. In the Marines, we called this kind of double-speak officer bullshit, but here I just had to smile and nod. The silence in that room was thick enough to cut with a K-bar. Howard Webb, who'd been my second-in-command for 11 years, suddenly found the floor fascinating. Howard's the kind of guy who'd follow you into hell if you asked nice, but corporate politics made him nervous. Jennifer Davis from logistics, who I'd promoted from the front desk when she was a single mom struggling to pay rent, wouldn't meet my eyes. Even Rebecca Walsh, who'd shared coffee and complained about management with me every morning for a decade, was studying her clipboard like it held the location of Jimmy Hoffa. "We need innovative thinking in our equipment deployment," Ronald said, his voice carrying that forced enthusiasm he used when the board was pressuring him about quarterly numbers. Ronald built this company with his bare hands, but somewhere along the way he'd started listening to consultants who'd never operated a backhoe in their lives. "Jeffrey's experience will be valuable as Stephanie leads us into more efficient operations." Experience. There's that word they use when they mean your methods are outdated but you're too expensive to fire outright. Back in the Corps, we had a different word for 30 years of experience: wisdom. Stephanie's smile was all business school polish and zero warmth, the kind of expression they probably taught in MBA programs for handling legacy personnel. Jeffrey's institutional knowledge will certainly inform our modernization initiatives, but we need to move beyond outdated approaches if we're going to maximize operational efficiency in today's competitive landscape. Outdated approaches. Translation. Everything I'd built over 3 decades was now considered obsolete by someone who'd never had hydraulic fluid under her fingernails. She pointed toward a cramped office near the parts warehouse, barely bigger than a supply closet. "That space will work perfectly for your consulting activities. I'll need the main office cleared by end of day." My office. Where I'd spent countless nights figuring out logistics for emergency jobs when Hurricane Harvey flooded half of Houston, and we had to get equipment moving in 4 hours instead of 4 days. Where I'd trained 24 young guys who were now running crews across Texas, teaching them that equipment maintenance wasn't just about schedules, it was about keeping people safe. Where I'd negotiated the maintenance contracts that kept our machines running 15% longer than industry standard, which saved the company about $400,000 annually. The wall still had the safety certificate from when we went 18 months without a reportable accident, a record I was personally proud of because every day without an accident meant someone's father or son went home safe to their family. Next to it hung a photo from last year's company barbecue, back when we felt like a family instead of a corporate acquisition target. "Understood," I said, keeping my voice steady. "In the Marines, you learn not to show weakness, especially when someone's trying to break you down. No point making a scene. Not yet." After the meeting broke up, I watched maintenance guys haul my filing cabinets to the basement, while Stephanie supervised the installation of some modern furniture where my family photos used to sit. My granddaughter Emily's drawing of a bulldozer, the one she'd made when she visited last month and I let her sit in the operator's seat of a Cat 320, went into a box with everything else that represented 30 years of my professional life. My new office was basically a glorified storage room with a desk that wobbled every time I typed and a computer that wheezed like an old diesel engine when it booted up. The kind of machine we'd retired from the main floor 5 years ago because it was too slow for inventory tracking. There was barely enough room for the desk and a filing cabinet, and the single window looked out at the dumpster behind the parts depot. Real subtle message there, about as subtle as a drill sergeant at 5 a.m. The phone rang almost immediately after I'd squeezed myself behind the tiny desk. "Tank, sorry man." But Stephanie called a meeting in the main conference room, Howard said, and I could hear the stress in his voice. He'd been with me long enough to recognize when something stunk worse than a latrine in August. She said supervisory staff only. "When's the meeting?" "Right now. She's talking about restructuring equipment deployment protocols and implementing new safety standards. They were discussing my equipment, my protocols, my safety standards, without me in the room. The same protocols that had increased our job completion rate by 23% over the past 4 years and kept us from losing a single worker to preventable accidents. In the Marines, when someone cut you out of planning missions you'd designed, it usually meant they were setting you up for a fall." "No problem," I said, because what else was I going to say? That after 30 years I deserved to be in that room? Howard knew it, I knew it, but neither of us was going to change Stephanie's mind by complaining. After hanging up, I tried logging into my computer to check emails. Password denied. Called IT support. "Sorry, Tank," said Timothy Clark, a kid I'd personally recommended for the job 2 years ago when he was fresh out of community college with a computer science degree and no real-world experience. I'd vouched for him because he reminded me of some of the young Marines I'd mentored. Smart, eager, but needing someone to show them how things actually worked. Stephanie ordered security restrictions on certain accounts during the transition period. I have to follow protocol. Even my computer access was cut off in my own department. Back at Paris Island, we had a saying. When someone starts restricting your access to intelligence, they're either protecting you or setting you up. Figure out which one fast. I sat there for a minute, listening to the familiar sounds of the yard through the thin walls. Forklifts moving equipment, workers calling out job assignments, the steady rhythm of productivity that I'd helped orchestrate for over 3 decades. All of it happening without me now, like I'd never existed. Around 4:30, Rebecca quietly slipped a printed email onto my desk. Must have been the only way to get information to me now. Subject line, "Optimizing heavy equipment operations for enhanced profitability." It was a 15-page presentation scheduled for next week's board meeting, with Stephanie listed as the author. But as I read through it, something cold settled in my gut. These weren't just similar ideas to my operational improvements. These were my exact protocols, word for word. The equipment rotation schedules I'd spent 2 years perfecting after analyzing breakdown patterns on every piece of machinery we owned. The maintenance algorithms that reduced our downtime by 31% because I'd figured out the sweet spot between preventive care and over-servicing. Even the emergency deployment procedures I'd written after Hurricane Harvey when we had to get heavy equipment to flooded areas faster than anyone thought possible. Everything had Stephanie's name on it. Every efficiency gain, every cost reduction, every safety protocol that had made our division the most profitable in the company's history. She'd taken 30 years of my work and slapped her MBA credentials on it like she'd invented the wheel. The presentation described how Stephanie had immediately identified significant inefficiencies in legacy equipment management and developed innovative solutions for modern construction demands. According to this document, Jeffrey Coleman had apparently contributed some useful historical context to her revolutionary thinking. Historical context. I'd gone from being the guy who designed the systems to being a footnote in someone else's success story. That's when my old Marine training kicked in completely. In reconnaissance, you don't just react to the first piece of bad intelligence you find. You gather more data, you analyze patterns, and you figure out what the enemy's real objective is. Because in my experience, when someone steals your work this systematically, they're not just looking for a promotion, they're planning something bigger. I went home that night and pulled out my personal backup drive from the safe in my bedroom closet, right next to my discharge papers and the photo of my old squad from Operation Desert Storm. See, in construction, you document everything. OSHA requires it, insurance companies demand it, and smart operators protect themselves with paper trails. But I'd also learned something in the military. Always keep your own copies of important intelligence because you never know when the official records might disappear. What I found as I started digging through those files made my hands shake slightly. Not from anger yet, but from recognition. Because I'd seen this kind of operational pattern before, back when I was a staff sergeant and we were tracking enemy movements in Kuwait. Someone was running a systematic campaign against our position, and they'd been planning it for a while. See, in the Marines, we studied patterns, how insurgents infiltrated bases, how they gathered intelligence before attacks, how they positioned themselves to cause maximum damage with minimum exposure. And Stephanie's story had more holes than a target after a full magazine. I started making calls to old contacts across Texas. Construction's a tight industry. Everybody knows everybody, especially when someone screws up big or when good people get burned. Third call, I reached Daniel Wright, former operations manager at Technical Solutions, Inc., a company that had gone belly up about 18 months ago. Tank, that woman was poison, Daniel told me straight up. No sugarcoating. Showed up talking efficiency improvements and modern management techniques. But every change she made weakened our safety protocols, cut maintenance schedules that had kept us competitive for 15 years, eliminated quality controls that our biggest clients specifically required. By the time we figured out what was happening, we'd lost our 3 largest contracts and were bleeding money faster than a punctured hydraulic line. What happened after the bankruptcy? Southwest Capital Partners bought our client list and equipment for pennies on the dollar. Turns out they'd been planning it all along. Parker got a fat bonus and disappeared, left 90 good people without jobs right before Christmas. The pattern was clear as Texas sunshine now. Stephanie wasn't here to improve Apex Heavy Industries. She was here to sabotage us from the inside, set us up for acquisition by Southwest Capital Partners just like she'd done to Technical Solutions. The efficiency protocols she'd stolen from me weren't meant to work long-term. They were designed to show short-term profits while undermining our foundation, making us look profitable enough to buy but weak enough to control. I spent the next 2 days putting together something that would change everything. Used my industry connections, guys I'd worked with for decades, suppliers who trusted me, even a couple contacts from my old Marine unit who'd moved into corporate security after their discharge. One thing about military guys in the business world, we look out for each other. My old squad leader, Tony Ramirez, was now doing security consulting for industrial companies in Dallas. When I called him up and explained what I was seeing, he didn't even hesitate. Tank, I've been tracking the same pattern for 6 months. Southwest Capital has hit at least 4 construction companies in Texas and Oklahoma using the exact same playbook. They send in these MBA types, tank the companies from inside, then swoop in for cheap acquisitions. It's corporate warfare, and most people don't see it coming until it's too late. Tony sent me a file that made my blood run cold. Stephanie Parker had been working this scheme for almost 3 years. Before Technical Solutions, she'd destroyed a crane rental company in Oklahoma City and a road construction outfit in San Antonio. Same pattern every time. Show up with impressive credentials, implement efficiency improvements that actually weaken the company's competitive position, steal the operational knowledge to make herself look good, then disappear when Southwest Capital moved in for the kill. The thing is, Tony told me during our second call, these people count on nobody connecting the dots. They pick companies in different states, change up their approach just enough to avoid obvious patterns, and they're usually dealing with owners who don't have time to investigate every new hire's complete background. But they hadn't counted on running into someone with military intelligence training and 30 years of industry contacts who'd learned to pay attention to details that didn't add up. Friday morning, I got to the office early before the security guard finished his rounds. I'd spent Thursday night preparing one final document, a comprehensive analysis of Stephanie's background, her connection to Southwest Capital Partners, and a timeline showing how she'd systematically destroyed her previous companies using the exact same playbook she was implementing here. The document was 8 pages of pure facts. Bank records showing payments from Southwest Capital to shell companies connected to Stephanie. Employment records showing the mysterious 6-month gaps between her previous jobs, just long enough for the companies she'd sabotaged to collapse completely. even some photos Tony had managed to dig up showing her at Southwest Capital corporate events, smiling next to the same executives who'd later bought the wreckage of Technical Solutions. I placed a single manila folder on Stephanie's desk with a simple note: Operational Assessment, Historical Pattern Analysis, and Competitive Intelligence Review. Then I headed out to handle my 8 a.m. call with our steel supplier, one of the few meetings still on my calendar. When I got back at 10:30, the whole building was buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. Security guards were stationed outside the executive offices, and I could see Ronald through his glass door with his phone pressed to his ear, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. The kind of pacing you do when your world's falling apart and you're trying to figure out how you missed the signs. Rebecca hurried over to me, eyes wide with excitement and confusion. "Tank, what did you put in that file?" Stephanie ran into Ronald's office about 20 minutes ago, yelling about harassment and false accusations. Then security showed up, and now there's board members here with some lawyers. I nodded and headed toward my closet office, feeling calm for the first time in a week. Funny thing about military training, once you've identified the enemy's position and called in the artillery, there's nothing left to do but wait for the smoke to clear. "Aren't you worried?" Rebecca asked, following me. "About what?" She gestured toward the executive wing where you could see suits moving around behind frosted glass. "About all this?" "Nope," I said simply. "I'm not worried at all. See, the thing most people don't understand about revenge is that it's not about anger. Real revenge is about patience, preparation, and letting your enemy destroy themselves with their own actions. All I'd done was provide the documentation. Southwest Capital and Stephanie Parker had done all the heavy lifting. At noon, Ronald's assistant appeared with a printed meeting request. Main conference room. Immediate. The walk to the executive floor felt different this time. Instead of people avoiding eye contact, I caught nods from several of the crew supervisors. Word was spreading fast that something big was happening, and guys who'd worked with me for years were starting to put pieces together. I found Ronald at the head of the conference table with Sarah Thompson from legal and Amanda Wilson from the board of directors. Stephanie was notably absent, which told me everything I needed to know about how that morning meeting had gone. "Sit down, Tank," Ronald said, looking like he'd aged a decade since Monday. The kind of look you get when you realize you've been played by professionals and nearly lost everything you'd built. "The file you left?" he began carefully. "Where did you get this information? Company records, supplier communications, publicly available financial documents, and some help from old military contacts who specialize in corporate security," I replied. "Everything's documented and verifiable." Sarah leaned forward, her expression grim. "Jeffrey, you've made serious allegations about corporate espionage and deliberate sabotage. This goes way beyond normal business competition." "I haven't made allegations," I corrected her. "I compiled data and identified patterns. The evidence speaks for itself." Amanda Wilson, who'd been quiet until now, set down her reading glasses and looked directly at me. "If what you've documented proves accurate, we're looking at criminal charges and federal involvement. This isn't just about our company. It's about a systematic fraud operation." Ronald rubbed his temples like he had the mother of all headaches. "You're saying Stephanie deliberately implemented strategies that destroyed her previous companies, and now she's replicating those same strategies here for the benefit of outside investors?" "The data supports that conclusion, yes. And based on the timeline, you were probably about 6 months away from financial collapse if this had continued." "Stephanie's been suspended pending a full investigation," Amanda said quietly. "We're bringing in external auditors tonight. If what you've documented proves accurate, we're looking at criminal charges and possible federal involvement. Over the next week, everything unraveled exactly like I knew it would. The external investigators confirmed everything I'd found and more. Stephanie hadn't just been stealing my operational protocols. She'd been feeding our entire competitive strategy to Southwest Capital partners, including client lists, pricing structures, and equipment deployment schedules that took us years to optimize. The FBI got involved by Wednesday when the investigators discovered that Southwest Capital had been using insider information to underbid us on 3 major contracts over the past 2 months. Contracts we should have won easily, but somehow our competitors knew exactly what numbers to hit. That's when this went from corporate espionage to federal wire fraud. Tony Ramirez called me Thursday morning with an update that made me smile for the first time in 2 weeks. "Tank, you just took down a major operation. FBI raided Southwest Capital's Dallas offices yesterday and found evidence linking them to at least 8 companies across 4 states. Your documentation was the key that broke the whole thing open. By Friday morning, Stephanie's access cards were deactivated, her office was sealed with federal evidence tape, and the company directory no longer listed her name. Clean sweep, just like a successful military operation. But the real satisfaction came Monday morning when I walked through the equipment yard and saw my crew back to normal. Howard wasn't avoiding eye contact anymore. In fact, he came up and shook my hand like we'd just completed a successful mission together. Jennifer Davis actually smiled when she handed me the morning logistics report. Even the guys operating the heavy equipment were giving me nods of respect as I passed. My phone started ringing that same day. Word travels fast in the construction world when someone exposes corporate sabotage and saves American jobs. Mr. Coleman, this is Christina Morgan from Reynolds Equipment Corp. We'd like to discuss a Vice President of Operations position with you. Our CEO specifically requested that I reach out after hearing about your situation. That was the first of 7 calls I got that week. Turns out protecting honest businesses and exposing industrial espionage makes a man pretty marketable in Texas. Companies from Houston to El Paso were calling with offers that would have doubled my salary and given me stock options I'd only dreamed about. But the call that mattered most came Wednesday afternoon from Ronald himself. Tank, can you come to my office and bring your coffee cup? This might take a while. I found Ronald behind his desk with a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses, something I'd never seen him do in 30 years. Jeffrey, I owe you an apology and a lot more than that. You saved this company and I nearly let some MBA consultant destroy everything we've built. Ronald, you couldn't have known. I should have known. I should have listened to my gut instead of some board members who thought we needed to modernize our leadership approach. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon into each glass and slid one across the desk. Here's what I want to do. I'm promoting you to Executive Vice President of Operations with a 15% equity stake in the company. You've earned ownership in what you helped build. 15%. After 30 years of working for wages, I was becoming a part owner of Apex Heavy Industries. The bourbon went down smooth, but not as smooth as the feeling of complete vindication. There's something else, Ronald continued. The board wants you to implement new security protocols to prevent this from happening again. Basically, they want you to be our defense against corporate infiltration.
Interested? Very interested. The best part came Thursday when my granddaughter Emily visited the office. Linda dropped her off during her lunch break, and Emily ran straight to my desk, back in the main office where it belonged, clutching a new drawing she'd made at school. This time it was a picture of me standing next to a bulldozer with Hero Grandpa written in purple crayon across the top. Below that, she'd drawn what looked like a bunch of stick figures with their hands up, and when I asked her about it, she said, "That's you catching the bad guys like on TV, Grandpa." I hung that drawing right next to my safety certificates and the photo from last year's company barbecue. Then I walked Emily around the equipment yard, letting her sit in the operator seats and pretend to drive the machines while I explained how everything worked. Same thing I'd done when my own boys were young, back when they thought their old man hung the moon. "Grandpa Tank, are you the boss?"
Of all these big trucks now? She asked while sitting behind the wheel of a Cat 330. Something like that, sweetheart. Something like that. Later that evening, after Linda picked up Emily and the yard had quieted down for the day, I sat in my office looking over the security protocols I was designing. Howard knocked on my doorframe around 6 p.m. "Tank, I wanted to apologize for not backing you up when this whole thing started. I knew something was wrong, but..." "Howard, you've got nothing to apologize for. Corporate politics makes good people do things they don't want to do. What matters is, we all came through it together." He nodded and was quiet for a minute. "You know what the guys are saying out there? They're saying you're the only reason they still have jobs. That woman would have destroyed us all. Maybe. But that's not why I did it. I know. That's what makes you different, Tank. You didn't do it for revenge or to prove a point. You did it because it was the right thing to do. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's protecting what matters and proving that 30 years of real experience, genuine relationships, and attention to detail will always triumph over fancy degrees and corporate sabotage schemes designed to fool people who should know better. If this story teaches you anything, it's that people trying to erase your contributions usually can't build anything themselves. They can only steal what others have created and slap their name on it. And when you've spent decades building something real with real relationships and real knowledge that can't be faked, the truth always has a way of surfacing, especially when you're patient enough to let the evidence speak for itself. In a world where MBA consultants can walk in and steal decades of your work overnight, remember this: they can copy your systems, but they can't replicate the relationships, respect, and real-world wisdom that built those systems in the first place. The biggest mistake these corporate raiders make is thinking that destroying a man's position destroys the man. They forget that someone who survived military service, raised a family, and built something lasting doesn't break that easily. And when he fights back, he fights to win.